My stepmother had a big, expensive birthday cake ready for my cousin because she was supposed to be the star of the night. Along with it, they gifted her a brand new car. They had never celebrated my birthday in 25 years and never even noticed my poor condition. I was still driving a scooty while they showered her with luxury. They toasted to her future while I sat back, smiling. Soon they'd realize who really won the night. The air in the room was thick with the buzz of laughter, clinking glasses, and the unmistakable sound of a life that didn't belong to me unfolding before my eyes. It was Jessica's birthday, and there I was, the lone figure in the corner as always. My cousin, the golden child, sat at the center of it all. Linda, my stepmother, looked at her with adoration that could have been mistaken for worship. Every word of praise she spoke was a dagger to my chest, but I stood there, still pretending not to care. The enormous birthday cake gleamed under the lights, layers of frosting and colorful decorations that spoke of a celebration meant to draw attention. It was as if Jessica herself was the star of some grand performance, and Linda was the proud stage manager, ensuring every detail was perfect. The kind of attention I had never received. As I sipped my drink and stared at the festivities, I couldn't help but feel small, unnoticed, and invisible. I should have been happy for Jessica, but the truth was, it hurt. It hurt more than I cared to admit, especially when I knew deep down that I was always going to be the backdrop to her brilliance. I could feel the cold weight of my worn-out scooty lingering in my mind, parked just outside their beautiful home. The same scooty I had been riding for years, while they lived in their bubble of perfection. My life was nowhere near the extravagance they lived, nor did they ever seem to notice how much I worked just to make ends meet. Their world was a fast lane, while I was stuck on the side, watching as the wheels of their privileged lives sped ahead. The juxtaposition was stark. Jessica in her glamorous dress, sparkling with attention, and me fading into the background, a forgotten character in a scene I was never meant to star in. I couldn't escape it. The grand party that seemed to celebrate her existence reinforced the bitter truth I had been carrying for years. Linda and Jack, my father, only saw what they wanted to see. They saw Jessica as the daughter who was everything they had ever dreamed of. Perfect, obedient, and loved. I was just a filler in their lives. Someone who showed up, worked hard, and did what was expected without ever being acknowledged. I had become invisible in a room full of noise and excitement. The tension was unbearable. As Linda presented Jessica with the new car, my stomach churned. The car, wrapped in a bright red bow, was the kind of gift that screamed, "You've made it." A gift so extravagant that it made the fact that I still had a rusting old scooter feel like a cruel joke. I smiled, but the smile felt hollow. It wasn't jealousy. No, not at all. It was something deeper, something darker. The crushing realization that my life, despite all my efforts, had no place in their story. I wasn't seen for who I was, for what I had achieved. All they saw was Jessica, the perfect one, the one who could do no wrong. My accomplishments, no matter how small or significant, went unnoticed. And that was the moment I broke. The tipping point wasn't just about the car. It was about everything leading up to this point. The years of doing what was expected of me, working hard in silence, and always being overshadowed by Jessica's every move. I had spent my entire life as a backdrop to her success. Her perfect grades, her flawless skin, her sparkling personality. She was everything I was not, and I could never escape it. And that night I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't let myself fade into the background while everyone else thrived in their perfect little world. I left the party early, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. As I drove home, the darkness of the night seemed to match the turmoil inside me. The wind slapped against my face as I gripped the handlebars of my scooter, the same one I had been riding for years. I had become so accustomed to being second best, to playing a role that I never wanted, that I had almost accepted it. But tonight something had shifted. I realized that I wasn't just resentful. I was angry. Angry at myself for not seeing my own worth, and angry at them for never acknowledging it. But most of all, I was angry that I had let them define who I was for so long. By the time I reached my small apartment, my thoughts were racing. I couldn't shake the image of Jessica sitting in her new car, smiling as if everything she had was deserved. What about me? What had I done to deserve a fraction of that attention? What had I worked for? It wasn't about gifts or praise. It was about respect. It was about being seen for the effort I put into everything I did. I wasn't asking for a gold-plated car or a lavish birthday cake. I was asking for recognition. That night, alone in my room, I let myself reflect. It wasn't just about the party or the car. It was about a lifetime of being overshadowed by someone who, in all fairness, was everything I couldn't be. I was never going to be Jessica. I was never going to fit into the mold they wanted me to. But maybe that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I had let myself believe I was less than enough, simply because I didn't meet their expectations. They had never truly seen me, not for who I was or what I had accomplished. They only saw what I wasn't, and I had let that shape my entire life. I had never considered that maybe it was time to see myself differently. I had lived my entire life in the shadow of their praise for Jessica, but I had never asked myself what I truly wanted. No one was going to hand me the validation I was so desperately seeking. No one was going to change how they saw me until I changed how I saw myself. I needed to do something for me, not for anyone else. And that was the first moment I realized that maybe the answer had been right in front of me all along. This town, my home, the very place I had been trying to escape for so long. The next morning, still carrying the weight of the previous night's realization, I went for a walk. The town, small as it was, had always seemed like a place full of untapped potential. I'd never really looked at it with the eyes of someone who could transform it. But now everything seemed different. The green fields stretched for miles, the untouched woods whispered secrets, and the calm river reflected the sky like a mirror. There was something here, something I had never noticed before. This town wasn't just my home, it was an opportunity. I thought back to a trip I had taken a few years ago to a nearby city. They had turned their natural beauty into a booming ecotourism business. It had struck me then how much potential was sitting right under our noses, waiting to be recognized. If I could turn the town's untouched landscapes into a destination for people looking for an escape, maybe, just maybe, I could change everything. That night, I sat down in my small apartment, alone and determined. I grabbed a pen and began to write. The idea started small, but as I jotted down my thoughts, it grew. I could turn the town into a hub for sustainable tourism, focusing on nature walks, hiking tours, and farm stays. A place where people could get away from the noise of the world and reconnect with nature. It wasn't just a pipe dream. It was my chance. My chance to show everyone, including myself, that I could make something of this town. I wasn't going to get validation from my family. Not the way I wanted it. But maybe I could create something bigger than all of us. And in doing so, maybe I would finally be seen, not by my family but by the world outside. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving to myself that I was worth something, no matter how invisible they had made me feel. I was awake long before the sun crept over the horizon. The quiet of the early morning was when my mind felt most clear, when the weight of the world was just a faint hum in the background. The world was still. I stood by the window of my small apartment, my thoughts tumbling over one another, each more pressing than the last. The dream I had in mind was big, too big for my small town and certainly too big for me. But as the first light hit the empty streets outside, I knew that I had to start somewhere. Starting small was the only way. With no capital, no backing, and no glamorous business plan, I decided that my first step would be reaching out to the community. I couldn't afford a marketing campaign or a flashy website yet, but I had something even more valuable: relationships. The people in this town had seen me grow up, watched me stumble, and for the most part, they'd ignored my attempts to change. But now I had something to offer them, and I was going to make sure they saw it. My first stop was the local farmer, Mr. Thompson. He was well known in town for his sprawling fields of corn, but even more so for his gruff demeanor. The moment I mentioned the idea of offering farm stays or guided tours, I could see the skepticism wash over his face. His first response was, "Tourists don't come to places like this." He was blunt, as he always was, but I wasn't about to back down so easily. "I know," I said, smiling despite the sting. "But that's exactly why we need to do this. People are looking for something real, something authentic. We've got something beautiful here, something worth sharing." It was a small victory when he finally agreed to let me bring a few tourists to his farm. The first group wasn't large, just 5 people, but the excitement in their faces as they walked through his fields, learning about the harvest, was palpable. I had done it. I had taken the first step. But it didn't stop there. I knew that Mr. Thompson's farm was just the beginning. I needed more. I needed more local faces, more land, more crafts, more stories to tell. I spent the next few weeks knocking on doors, visiting neighbors who I had known my whole life. Some were receptive to the idea right away. Others, like old Mrs. Fisher, were much more hesitant. "Tourists?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she examined me over her glasses. "What good would they do here? They're better off in the city." Her words stung, but I didn't let them deter me. Instead, I told her about the possibilities, how she could teach people how to weave baskets, how to make jam from her garden strawberries, how to show them how she had kept these traditions alive for decades. Slowly but surely, I convinced her to give it a try. The first day she held a small workshop with a few visitors. She was as skeptical as ever, but by the end of the session her doubts had melted away. The tourists loved her stories, her wisdom, and the time spent in her garden. I saw a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't easy, but one by one I built a team, local farmers, artisans, and chefs, who shared the same vision. They saw that this wasn't just about making money. It was about showing the world the soul of our town. It wasn't about making a quick profit. It was about creating something sustainable, something meaningful. Each partnership felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of my dream. I knew from the start that I didn't want this to be just another tourism venture. It had to be different. The idea wasn't to just shuttle people in and out of the town with a quick sightseeing tour. I wanted them to experience something deeper, to leave feeling like they had not only seen the town but had truly connected with it. I spoke to a few chefs in town and asked them to participate. Instead of just serving standard meals, I wanted them to teach visitors how to cook with local ingredients, how to make dishes passed down for generations. The key was immersion. I emphasized that this experience would be personal, authentic. No mass-produced trinkets, no tourist traps. Visitors would engage directly with the people who made this town what it was. They would help harvest crops, participate in local festivals, and learn crafts that had been handed down for generations. It wasn't just about watching, it was about participating. There were days, though, when it felt like the weight of it all might crush me. It wasn't just the logistical hurdles, getting permits, designing itineraries, setting prices, but also the mental exhaustion. I was still working my full-time job, squeezing every free moment I had into planning this business. Every night I would fall into bed exhausted, but I couldn't stop. There were so many details to iron out, so many connections to make. The first few months were a blur. I barely made enough money to cover my expenses, but the guests who did come, fewer than I'd hoped, were so enthusiastic about the experience. They raved about the personal touch, the authenticity of it all. Word of mouth started to spread. Slowly but surely things began to grow. One guest would tell a friend who told another friend, and before I knew it, my small operation was beginning to attract more attention than I had ever imagined. Then came my first major breakthrough. A local food blogger visited the town on a whim. She had heard about my tours and decided to check it out. I'll admit I was nervous. Her blog had a wide readership, and if she didn't like it, I could kiss my chances of growth goodbye. But her visit went better than I could have hoped. She wrote about the town with such warmth, highlighting the people and the experiences they offered. The blog post was shared hundreds of times, bringing in a new wave of tourists. The feeling of recognition, the sense that someone out there saw my hard work, my passion, was indescribable. The visitors who came after that were more engaged, more invested in the idea. They didn't just visit. They became part of our community, even if just for a few days. They shared meals with us, they learned from us, and most importantly, they left with something real. But even as things seemed to be moving forward, the challenges were far from over. The weather was always a factor. There were weeks where rainstorms canceled hikes and made the tours difficult to run. And then there was the constant strain of securing funding. No matter how much I made, it always seemed like there was a shortage. I was constantly in search of new ways to improve the operation, always tweaking and adjusting. But with every setback came a lesson. I had to adapt, to learn how to handle the unexpected. I taught myself everything from marketing to accounting, diving headfirst into every aspect of the business. I wasn't just learning about running a business. I was learning who I was in the process. It wasn't always glamorous. Some days I wondered if I was doing the right thing. The doubts crept in, whispering that maybe this dream wasn't worth it, that maybe I should go back to the life I knew. But then every time a new group of tourists arrived, every time I saw someone light up with excitement over something as simple as fresh produce or a handcrafted bowl, I knew I was on the right path. I was no longer just building a business. I was building a future. One step at a time, one guest at a time, and one partnership at a time. The dream that had seemed so distant was becoming a reality. And with each small victory I felt more and more certain that I could make it work. I had reached a point where doubt was starting to feel like a permanent companion. The excitement of starting something new had worn off, replaced by the harsh realities of running a business. The bookings were slow, the funds were tight, and there were days when I wondered if I had made a mistake. I questioned whether the dream was even possible. Was I just chasing something that would always be out of reach? The weight of responsibility felt heavier every day. I had put everything into this, my time, my energy, my heart. And yet the progress was frustratingly slow. But just as I was about to throw in the towel, something unexpected happened. It was a normal Thursday when I received a message from Mia, a local influencer I had met once at a community event. She'd visited the town a few weeks earlier, had taken part in one of our hiking tours, and had posted a few photos. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a few likes from her followers, nothing more. But Mia had something else in mind. She sent me a direct message, telling me she was going to do a full post about her experience. She was passionate about ecotourism and wanted to share what we were doing here. I was cautiously optimistic. I had heard stories of influencers boosting small businesses, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. A post, no matter how well-intentioned, wasn't a guarantee of success. But Mia's enthusiasm was contagious, and I trusted her. The following week the post went live. I sat at my desk checking my phone with a mix of hope and anxiety. At first there was little activity. A few comments, some likes, but nothing that made my heart race. But then slowly the number started to climb. Shares, more comments, questions about availability, and people tagging their friends. Her post, filled with stunning images of the town and our tours, was picking up steam. By the time I went to bed that night I had a flood of messages in my inbox. Bookings were coming in faster than I could handle. I barely slept, my mind racing with the sudden shift in momentum. I was overwhelmed, exhilarated, and terrified all at once. The phone kept buzzing, and each new message felt like a small victory. People from nearby cities, even from across the state, were reaching out. They wanted to visit the town. They wanted to experience what Mia had shared. It felt surreal, like the tipping point I had been waiting for had finally arrived. The following days were a whirlwind. I scrambled to get everything in order. My small team of local guides wasn't enough to accommodate the surge in visitors. The town, once so quiet, was now buzzing with activity. As the bookings grew, so did the pressure to meet expectations. I found myself needing to expand the tours, add more options, and ensure the same personal touch that had made my business unique. I had to think bigger, faster, and smarter. With the additional income from the increased bookings, I hired more local guides, including some of the farmers I had originally partnered with. They knew the land better than anyone, and their knowledge added an authenticity to the tours that no outsider could replicate. They weren't just employees, they were part of the story. They helped share the rich history of the town and the traditions that had been passed down for generations. The guests loved the personal insights they provided. And every time a visitor walked away with a sense of connection to the place, I knew I had made the right choice. As the months passed, the media began to take notice. The local newspaper ran a feature about the town's growing ecotourism industry, highlighting our business as a key player in the revitalization of rural tourism. It was the exposure I had always hoped for but never expected so soon. The article was picked up by a major national publication, and suddenly the world was paying attention. My business, our business, was no longer just a local operation. It was a model for sustainable tourism, a beacon for what rural communities could achieve by embracing their natural assets. I started to see the results in real time. More tourists arrived, eager to experience the same authentic adventure that had been shared by Mia's followers. It wasn't just about the tours anymore. It was about the story we had crafted together. Our town, once overlooked and forgotten, was now drawing attention from across the country. It felt incredible to see it all unfold, like I was watching the dream I had so desperately clung to finally take shape. But as the business grew, so did the growing pains. The excitement of new opportunities was quickly tempered by the realities of expansion. It was no longer just about me. There were staff to manage, budgets to keep track of, and logistics to handle. I was constantly worried about maintaining the authenticity of the experience while scaling up. The very thing that made our business special, the intimate personal touch, was at risk of being lost in the shuffle. Would we still be able to give guests the close-knit, hands-on experience that they came for? There were moments of doubt when I felt like the business was slipping out of my control. The increasing demand for tours meant more staff, more schedules, more expectations. I started to feel stretched thin. The fear of losing what had made this whole thing so special haunted me. But every time I took a step back and watched a guest's face light up when they harvested their first batch of tomatoes, or when they took their first step into a local artisan's workshop, I knew it was worth it. I had to find a way to grow without compromising the core of what we had built. And that's when I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This business was no longer just mine to manage. It had become a part of the community, something bigger than myself. I wasn't just offering a service. I was helping to breathe life into the town, giving it a purpose, a reason to be proud again. I began to hire more locals, providing jobs that had once seemed impossible to come by. The farmers, artisans, and shopkeepers who had once been hesitant to embrace tourism now saw how their work was being valued in ways they hadn't imagined. The town's economy was revitalized. People who had struggled for years now had stable work and a sense of pride in what they were offering to visitors. I watched as the people who had once doubted me became some of my biggest supporters, and I realized that this success wasn't just about me, it was about the entire town. As the business grew, so did my own sense of identity. I was no longer the girl with the rusty scooter, the one who had always felt invisible. I was a business owner, a community leader, someone who had transformed her vision into something real. The respect I had always longed for from my family, my friends, and my neighbors was no longer something I needed to chase. It was something I had earned. My quiet revenge was unfolding not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the slow, undeniable rise of my success. The town that had once overlooked me now looked to me as an example of what was possible when someone was determined enough to push past their limits. I wasn't just the girl from the small town anymore. I was someone who had brought it back to life. Someone who had turned a dream into a reality. And as I stood on the edge of what I had created, watching a new group of visitors walk down the street, I realized that the journey had only just begun. There was still so much more to do, so much more to give. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally on the path I was always meant to be on. It was an ordinary morning when I saw them pull up to the town square, my father's car and Linda's sleek vehicle parked side by side. I had no idea they were coming. They'd never shown much interest in my work before, and honestly, I had long stopped hoping they would. But there they were, standing in the doorway of my office like they belonged, as if they had every right to be there to see what I had built. I had to suppress a nervous laugh. This was it, the moment I had secretly been waiting for. I greeted them with a calmness I didn't quite feel. "Hi, Dad. Linda. What brings you to town?" I asked, my voice smooth, but there was a knot in my stomach that refused to unwind. I had been working for years to prove myself not to them but to myself. Yet here they were, at the very heart of what I had accomplished, looking at it with fresh eyes. Linda was the first to speak. Her eyes scanned the bustling town square, where tourists meandered from one artisan's stall to another. She looked at the crowds, then at me, her face a mix of confusion and wonder. "Katie, this is incredible," she said almost under her breath, as though she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. There was a hesitation in her voice, but also something new. Something I hadn't heard before: respect. I forced myself not to react too dramatically. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her words meant to me. But inside, a small part of me was smiling. "I'm glad you think so," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "It's been a lot of work, but it's coming together." Linda looked around again, her gaze lingering on the small shops, the lively farmers, and the smiling tourists. For a moment I thought she might say something dismissive, something that would brush off the months of hard work that had gone into turning this dream into a reality. But then she turned to me, her expression shifting. "You've really turned this place around, haven't you? I had no idea. I didn't realize how big this could get. You've done something remarkable here, Katie. Something I didn't think was possible." Her words weren't perfect, and they weren't as grand as I might have wanted them to be. But they were enough. Linda, who had always brushed off my ambitions with a well-timed eye roll, was now looking at me like I had earned something. The validation I had longed for, no matter how delayed it had been, was finally here. And I wasn't even sure what to do with it. As we walked through the market, I showed them the latest expansion. A new craft station where tourists could learn to weave baskets or try their hand at pottery. The guests were so engaged, smiling as they participated in these simple but meaningful activities. I couldn't help but smile too. Every corner of this place felt like a reflection of the vision I had fought for. But then as we passed by the stall where people were learning to make homemade jam, I noticed something else. A quiet shift happening in Jessica. She had been mostly silent up until that point, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. Watching her closely, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something I wasn't sure I had ever seen before. Was it jealousy? Or was it the realization that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't found the same sense of purpose in her life as I had in mine? Jessica had always been the golden child. She was the one everyone loved, the one who received praise for every little accomplishment. But here in this small town surrounded by my work, she looked like someone adrift in a sea of material wealth. She had always had everything. Money, cars, clothes. But it didn't seem to bring her the same fulfillment it once did. As we walked further, I caught her staring at the tourists, at the people who were genuinely grateful for the chance to experience this town in a way that felt raw, real. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. "I didn't realize you were doing all this for the town," Jessica said quietly as we walked back toward the car. It wasn't a question but a statement. And though she said it casually, I could hear the underlying tone, the shift. She was starting to understand. She had spent her whole life chasing things that glittered on the surface. But I had been building something that mattered. That was real. As we reached the car, Linda turned to me again, this time with a softness I hadn't expected. "I've been thinking about everything, Katie, and I regret not seeing what you were capable of. All these years I pushed you aside, always focused on Jessica. But you've proven me wrong. You've proven all of us wrong." I was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Her words were something I'd wanted to hear for years. But now that they were finally here, they didn't have the same sting I had imagined. They felt distant, almost like a long overdue apology. I nodded slowly, not sure what else to say. There was no sense in holding on to the past anymore. My father had been unusually quiet throughout the visit, only speaking when spoken to, and that was rare for him. But as we neared the end of the tour, he caught my arm gently. "Katie," he said softly, his voice low but sincere, I just want to say that I'm proud of you. You've done something none of us expected. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known, and I can't deny it anymore." For the first time in my life, I heard those words from my father. He didn't say them like it was some grand revelation. It wasn't a showy moment. But the sincerity in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. It was exactly what I had needed. Simple acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of everything I had fought for. That evening as we sat at dinner, I felt a strange sense of closure. The past and all the resentment I had carried around for so long seemed to melt away. My family, who had always been my critics, were finally starting to see me, not just as their daughter but as a person who had carved out her own place in the world. Linda's gaze lingered on me as she picked at her food, her earlier words still hanging in the air. I could tell she was reflecting on everything, the years of favoritism, the dismissive comments, the way she had been so blind to the effort I had put in. And in that silence I could feel her regret. But I didn't need her apology anymore. I had moved past it. I had learned to build my own worth, not from their approval but from my actions, my growth and my success. My victory, quiet as it was complete. I was no longer the overlooked daughter or the girl with the rusty scooty. I was a business owner, a leader, someone who had built something lasting from the ground up. And as I looked at my family, finally seeing the understanding in their eyes, I realized that this victory, this quiet triumph, was more than enough. I didn't need their recognition to feel proud anymore. I had done it on my own, and that was the only validation I needed. The family's realization had come too late for them to fully grasp how much I had achieved, but that didn't matter. I no longer cared about their approval. I had earned my place in the world. And as I stood there, the success of my hard work unfolding before me, I understood what true independence and respect felt like. Earned, not given. As I stood on the balcony of my office, looking out at the now thriving town square, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swelling in my chest. What started as a simple dream, an idea born out of a quiet longing for something more, had transformed not just my life but the lives of those around me. My business had become the cornerstone of this town's economy. It was no longer a fleeting venture. It was a permanent fixture in the landscape of our community. And with that permanence came a responsibility. A responsibility I didn't take lightly. For years I had been working tirelessly to prove myself not to others, but to the person I saw in the mirror. But now, I realized that my journey wasn't just about my personal success. It was about leaving something behind, a legacy that would live on long after I was gone. The town that had once dismissed me as invisible was now something I had helped revive. It wasn't just about the tourists coming in, or the money flowing through the town's shops. It was about the renewed sense of purpose in the faces of the people who called this place home. As my business grew, so did my vision. I dreamed of expanding even further, not for the sake of profit, but for the sake of the people who had once overlooked me. I wanted to make sure the town wasn't just a brief stop on a tourist map. I wanted it to be a destination, a community where people could come together and experience something real. I had started this journey to build something for myself, but now it was clear. I was building something far more important. Something that would provide jobs, create opportunities, and bring lasting change to the community. I began to think about how I could expand my reach, not just in terms of tourism, but in how I could impact the town's culture and values. I started speaking to local artisans, farmers, and business owners about sustainable practices, urging them to incorporate eco-friendly methods into their work. From composting to water conservation, I encouraged everyone to take steps to ensure that the growth we were experiencing didn't come at the cost of our environment. Sustainability became the backbone of my operation. It wasn't enough to build something successful. I had to build it responsibly. I began planting trees along the town's streets, turning barren plots into green spaces that not only beautified the town but also helped reduce pollution. I worked with local farmers to implement sustainable farming practices, ensuring that the land would remain fertile for generations to come. And as I expanded my business, I incorporated eco-friendly tourism initiatives, making sure that every tour and every interaction with visitors emphasized the importance of protecting the environment. The more I worked to create a sustainable foundation for my business, the more I realized how much it had become part of my identity. I wasn't just the girl who had started a tourism business. I was now the woman who had become an advocate for the environment, someone who had taken her passion for the land and woven it into every aspect of her work. My business wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Along the way I had changed. The girl who had once sought validation from her family, who had spent her life quietly hoping for a moment of recognition, was no longer the same person. I had found purpose not in the eyes of my family, but in the work I had done for the town, for the people who lived here, and for the environment. I no longer needed to prove myself to anyone. The success of my business and the way it had transformed this place was proof enough. I had learned that success wasn't just about the end result. It was about the journey, the lessons learned along the way. And as my business grew, I found myself growing too. I wasn't just building an empire. I was building a life of meaning. The sense of fulfillment that came from seeing people engage with the town, learning from its history and immersing themselves in its culture, was something I had never anticipated. It wasn't just about tourists visiting. It was about creating a space where people could connect to something bigger than themselves. But what struck me most was the way my success had inspired others. In the early days, no one in the town had believed in me. I had been written off as someone who would never amount to much. But now my story was no longer just mine. It had become part of the town's story. Young entrepreneurs who had once doubted their potential were now coming to me for advice. I had become a role model, someone they looked up to for guidance and inspiration. I took these moments seriously. I mentored them, helping them learn the lessons I had learned the hard way, the importance of persistence, the value of hard work, and most importantly, the power of believing in yourself when no one else does. I worked with local students, teaching them about sustainable business practices and encouraging them to dream big. For the first time in my life, I realized that my legacy wasn't just about the business I had built. It was about the next generation. The young people who would take the lessons I had learned and apply them to their own ventures. I watched as new businesses began to sprout up in the town, all grounded in the same principles I had established. A local cafe started sourcing its ingredients from nearby organic farms. A small clothing boutique began using recycled fabrics in its designs. The town was changing, and it wasn't just because of the influx of tourists. It was because of the shift in mindset. People were beginning to realize that they could build something lasting too. But as the town flourished, so did my own personal growth. The insecurities that had once plagued me, the doubts about whether I was good enough, whether I was worthy of success, those faded away. I was no longer the girl who had struggled to be seen. I was the woman who had built something meaningful. I had proved to myself that I was capable of far more than I had ever thought possible. There were times when I would walk through the streets of the town, now buzzing with activity, and reflect on how far I had come. I would see the farmers, the artisans, the shopkeepers, people who had once struggled to make ends meet, now thriving in their own right. And I realized that my success had never been about revenge or about proving something to my family. It had always been about creating something meaningful. Something that would leave an impact long after I was gone. Standing at the helm of my thriving business, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about money or accolades or recognition. It was about living a life that mattered. A life that had purpose, a life that had meaning. And as I looked around at the community I had helped build, I understood that this was the true legacy. It was the ripple effect of hard work, dedication, and a commitment to something bigger than myself. This was my gift to the town and to myself. In the end, I had come to realize that true success wasn't measured by the number of customers or the amount of profit. It was measured by the impact you had on the world around you. And as I stood in the heart of my town watching it grow and thrive, I knew that my legacy was secure, not in the material things I had accumulated, but in the way I had helped shape the future of this place and the lives of those who called it home. I was mourning my father's death while my husband was on a romantic getaway with his cousin, but he doesn't know I've already spoken to the hotel staff. I remember the exact moment the world as I knew it shattered into a million pieces. I had been sitting on the couch, wrapped in an oversized sweater, cradling my phone against my ear as I tried to hold back the tears. My father had just passed away, and the weight of grief seemed almost too heavy to bear. My body ached from the sadness and my mind wandered aimlessly, numb to everything around me. All I could think of was how unfair it was. My dad gone forever, leaving me with nothing but memories. The world was supposed to make sense, but everything felt wrong. Before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for being part of this journey with me. If you're finding strength in these stories of resilience and reclaiming control, don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free and helps us grow this powerful community. Now let's dive back into this story of betrayal, revenge, and empowerment. Then just as I was trying to find a sliver of peace, I heard it, the buzz of my phone. It was an anonymous message from an unknown number, but what it contained would change my life forever. The image that flashed across my screen wasn't one I had expected, let alone something I could prepare for. It was a picture of my husband, Jason, laughing on a sandy beach with another woman, his arm around her waist like he had never cared about me at all. There were no signs, no warnings, just a single damning snapshot that felt like a dagger in my chest. And the words that came with it, "Is this your cousin?" burned into my soul. The truth was out there staring me in the face. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was as if the air around me had thickened, making it impossible to swallow. Was this really happening? Had I been so blind to his lies? The man I had spent years building a life with, was he really out there on some romantic getaway with someone else? It couldn't be true. Yes, couldn't. But as the reality of the situation sunk in, there was no denying the betrayal. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the evidence was right there, frozen in time. I sat there staring at the image, unable to process the flood of emotions crashing into me all at once. Anger, disbelief, betrayal. It was like a storm had swept through my entire being. How could Jason do this to me, especially now when I was at my most vulnerable, mourning the loss of my father? The pain from my grief was already unbearable, but this felt like a betrayal of a lifetime. My husband, the person I trusted more than anyone else, had slipped behind my back, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. I glanced over at his side of the bed, untouched and cold. He was supposed to be with me right now, helping me navigate through this impossible time, not off with another woman, pretending everything was normal. I should have noticed the signs, the late nights, the text he'd been deleting, the way he would always be too busy when I needed him most. But I had been so wrapped up in my own grief that I didn't see what was right in front of me. Maybe that was the most painful part. Not just the betrayal, but the realization that I had been so blind, so utterly consumed by my sorrow that I allowed it to happen. The worst part. He had the audacity to lie about it. When I confronted him just hours before his trip, Jason swore it was a business retreat. He even mentioned that his cousin would be there to keep him company. His words were smooth, rehearsed, and everything about them felt off. But I believed him. How could I have known otherwise? Who would think that their partner would deceive them during such a vulnerable time? I took a shaky breath and tried to calm my racing heart. I had to think. I needed to gather my thoughts before confronting him. How would I even begin to tell him that I knew the truth? I didn't know what hurt more. The fact that he was lying to my face, or the fact that he had so casually discarded me when I needed him the most. But as I looked at the photo again, a flicker of something darker began to rise within me. This wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. This was about making him understand the pain he had caused. This was about revenge. The thought of getting back at him made my blood boil. How dare he take this moment of grief and turn it into something so callous? I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. My father had passed away and I had nothing left to lose. If Jason thought he could escape the consequences of his actions, he was sorely mistaken. I would make sure he felt the weight of his betrayal, every single ounce of it. But how? How could I make him pay without sinking to his level? The answer came to me slowly, like a whisper at the back of my mind. It was simple. I would use his own lies against him. He had been so careless, so full of himself, assuming I would never find out. I would make him realize how wrong he was. But first I needed to be careful. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. I needed to plan, to execute my revenge with precision. If Jason thought this was just going to blow over, he was gravely mistaken. I was about to become the woman he never saw coming. The one who would make him regret ever betraying me. But for now, I needed to take a deep breath and let the shock wash over me. I had to gather my strength. I would deal with him later. As I set my phone down, I realized one thing for certain. I wasn't going to just sit back and let this go. Jason had no idea what was coming his way. And by the time he realized it, it would be too late. This was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. It's strange how quickly everything can change, how life can pivot in an instant, flipping from peaceful to chaotic, from joyful to tragic. Just a few months ago, I thought I had it all. Everything seemed perfect. Jason and I were living the life we'd always dreamed of, a cozy home nestled in a quiet neighborhood, friends, family, and most importantly, each other. But those quiet evenings, the soft laughter over dinner, and the plans we'd made for the future all felt so distant now, like fragments of a dream that slipped through my fingers. How had it all unraveled so quickly? How had I failed to notice the cracks forming in the foundation of our relationship? Jason was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was kind, attentive, and seemed genuinely devoted to me. I had known him for years, and everything about him, from his smile to his mannerisms, had become a part of the rhythm of my life. We'd been married for 3 years, and in that time, I had never once doubted him. The idea of betrayal never even crossed my mind. He was my person, my best friend, the one I turned to when life got hard, the one I shared my deepest thoughts and dreams with. Our connection had always felt like something rare, something I had worked hard to nurture and protect. The beginning of our relationship had been straightforward. We met in college, where we instantly clicked. Our friends loved us together, always saying how perfect we were for each other. We spent our weekends exploring the city, finding new coffee shops, and staying up late talking about everything from politics to our childhood memories. As we grew older, our bond only deepened. When Jason proposed, I didn't hesitate for a second. It was the happiest day of my life. We bought a house together soon after, a charming little place in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a dog we named Max. I could picture our future together, the family we would build, and the adventures we'd share. It was the life I had always dreamed of. But when my father got sick, everything changed. My world turned upside down. He was diagnosed with cancer, and within a matter of weeks, I became his primary caretaker. Jason was there for me at first, offering comfort and support, but as the months wore on, I began to feel a distance growing between us. It wasn't anything obvious, just small things at first. He would come home late from work, claiming he had extra shifts to cover, or he'd become absorbed in his phone, texting or checking emails at all hours. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, he had a demanding job and I was the one staying home caring for my father. I figured it was just the stress of balancing everything. But deep down I felt something was off. Jason was slipping away from me and I couldn't figure out why. During those long nights sitting by my father's bedside, I started to notice just how lonely I had become. My father's health was rapidly declining, and I had no one to talk to about the overwhelming emotions that came with watching him deteriorate. I confided in Jason, but he was often distant or too tired to listen. It was as if he was physically present but emotionally absent. The person I had once turned to for comfort no longer seemed to care, and I was left to carry the weight of my grief alone. I wanted to believe that it was just temporary, that once my father recovered or things calmed down, everything would go back to normal. But it didn't. Instead, I felt more isolated than ever. When my father finally passed away, I was devastated. The grief was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I couldn't imagine my life without him, and the thought of never hearing his voice again crushed me. Jason, sensing my pain, promised to be there for me to help me through the hardest time of my life. But I quickly learned that his promises were empty. The man who had once been my rock had become a shadow, someone who was no longer emotionally available. He started going on late-night business trips and weekend getaways. Each time he left, I felt a pang of dread in my chest. I tried to push those feelings away, convincing myself that everything was fine. After all, he was my husband and we had weathered storms before, hadn't we? It was only after the funeral that the real cracks began to show. I found myself sitting alone in our living room, staring at a photo of my father, remembering all the good times we had shared. Jason had been distant that morning, already talking about an upcoming work trip he needed to go on. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just more business as usual. But something didn't feel right. His behavior had been erratic and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. The thought of him having an affair had crossed my mind more than once, but I pushed it aside. Jason loved me. He wouldn't betray me like that, not after everything we had been through. But then came the moment that changed everything. It was the night of my father's wake when I received the anonymous message. The picture of Jason with another woman. My heart stopped in my chest as I stared at the image, unable to process what I was seeing. This woman wasn't a cousin or a colleague as he had claimed. She was his lover. The woman he had been spending his weekends with while I was at home, mourning my father. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All the late nights, the unexplained trips, every little detail that I had brushed off suddenly fell into place. Jason had been lying to me for months. I wanted to confront him right then, to demand an explanation, but the shock held me frozen. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Was he planning to leave me? The anger bubbled up inside me, but more than anything I felt betrayed. How could he do this to me? To us? I had been there for him through everything, through his ups and downs, his achievements and failures. But when I needed him the most, he had turned his back on me. The rage inside me grew as I thought about the betrayal, and a single thought surged to the forefront of my mind. I would make him regret this. The days following the discovery of Jason's betrayal felt like an endless blur. I was walking through life on autopilot, doing what I had to do but feeling as though I were detached from everything around me. My father's passing had already drained me, leaving me fragile, raw, and exposed, and now Jason had come along, stomping all over whatever semblance of stability I had left. The anger I felt wasn't immediate. It crept in slowly, like a persistent itch that refused to be scratched. First came the disbelief, the denial that Jason, the man I had trusted with my heart, could betray me in such a cruel and heartless way. Then came the sorrow, the deep, guttural ache of being discarded, of realizing that all the moments we had shared, the promises we had made to each other, meant nothing to him. I had given everything, and in return he had given me nothing but lies. That first night after I saw the photo, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of Jason with the other woman burned into my mind. The more I thought about it, the more the pain morphed into something else. Something darker, colder. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. How could he have done this to me? To us? How could he have thrown away everything we had built together for someone else, someone I didn't even know? The feeling of betrayal was suffocating, and it gnawed at me with every passing minute. For days I walked around in a fog trying to keep my emotions in check, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The smallest things triggered flashes of anger. His empty side of the bed, his unspoken apologies, the reminders of everything he had promised me, only to have it all broken in an instant. I kept thinking about how he had lied, how he had deceived me for so long. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was a liar, a master of deceit. And he thought he could get away with it. I had trusted him, opened myself to him in ways I had never done with anyone else. And now I was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered relationship. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer the woman I had been before. I wasn't just a victim of his betrayal. I was someone who had been pushed to the edge, and I was willing to fight back, to make sure that he would feel the weight of what he had done. As I sat in my living room one evening, the weight of everything sinking in, a thought crossed my mind that sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. It wasn't just about him lying or cheating. This was about me, about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. I had spent too long playing the role of the dutiful wife, always putting him first, always believing that everything would work out. But now I realized I needed to put myself first for once. If Jason thought he could get away with what he had done, then he was gravely mistaken. I was going to make sure he understood exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The first step in my plan was to gather as much information as I could. I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal, to uncover every hidden lie he had been telling me. I started going through his things, his emails, his phone messages, his social media accounts, anything that could give me a glimpse into what had been happening behind my back. It felt like an invasion of privacy, and part of me hated myself for doing it, but the other part knew it was necessary. I needed the truth, all of it. I couldn't confront him without knowing every detail of his deceit. And once I had the information, I would be ready. It wasn't long before I found the smoking gun. Jason had been texting the woman he had been with on the side, sending her messages about how much he missed her and how he couldn't wait to see her again. The messages were affectionate, full of endearments, and there was no doubt in my mind that this was more than just a fling. This was an emotional affair. Jason wasn't just having a physical relationship with this woman. He was emotionally invested in her. That realization hit me harder than anything else. He hadn't just betrayed me physically, he had given her a piece of his heart. I stared at the messages for a long time, trying to process the overwhelming flood of emotions that washed over me. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated, but beneath all that, there was a simmering anger that was growing more intense by the minute. How dare he treat me this way? How could he so easily throw away the woman who had stood by him, who had been his partner in every sense of the word, for someone else? I had given him my heart, my trust, and he had trampled all over it. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and strategy. I knew I had to be careful. If I confronted Jason too soon, he might try to manipulate the situation to twist things around and make me feel guilty for not trusting him. I couldn't let that happen. No, this time I was going to be the one in control. I was going to make sure that Jason understood exactly what it felt like to have everything he took for granted ripped away from him. The idea of revenge started to take shape in my mind. It wasn't just about hurting him. It was about making him see the consequences of his actions, of making him understand the depth of the pain he had caused me. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose everything, to have the world he had carefully built for himself crumble beneath his feet. I would be the one to tear down the life he had created piece by piece. And so, I began to put my plan into motion. It was a slow process, one that required patience and careful execution. But as the days passed, I found myself growing more determined. I had to make Jason pay for what he had done to me. He needed to know that I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he had always assumed I was. I was something else now. Something stronger, something that would stop at nothing to get the justice I deserved. But as I moved forward with my plan, there was a part of me that was afraid. Afraid of what I was becoming, of how far I was willing to go to hurt the person I had once loved. But in the end, I realized that it didn't matter. I had been pushed to my breaking point, and I had no choice but to fight back. If Jason wanted a fight, he was going to get one that he would never forget. The idea of revenge wasn't new to me. It had been simmering beneath the surface ever since I first saw the photo of Jason with another woman. But now, with every passing day, the notion had begun to take shape, becoming more than just an angry thought in my head. It had become a plan, one that I knew would be meticulous, calculated, and precise. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jason deserved to feel the same heartache and betrayal that I had experienced. He thought he could get away with his lies, but I was about to show him how wrong he was. The first step of my plan was simple: gather more evidence. I needed to know everything. Every detail, every message, every piece of information that would further expose his betrayal. I started by retracing my steps, thinking back to the moments I had ignored, the small signs that now seemed so obvious. The late nights he spent on his phone, the way he'd become protective of his devices, the way he'd taken more business trips than ever before. It all pointed in one direction: deceit. I scoured through his emails, his phone bills, his social media accounts, all of which were meticulously hidden or erased. But Jason didn't count on one thing: my knowledge of him. After years of being with him, I knew his routines, his passwords, his little tricks. It didn't take long for me to uncover a few things he hadn't expected me to find. There were more messages with the woman, even more explicit than the ones I had found before. The more I read, the more my anger grew. They had been seeing each other for months, meeting at hotels, sneaking around behind my back. And here I was, left in the dark, grieving for my father while he was off living a life of deception. It was a sickening feeling, realizing that all this time, I had been so oblivious to the truth. I had been too focused on my own grief to notice what was happening right under my nose. But now that I had the information, it was time to act. I knew that confronting him outright would only lead to lies and manipulation, so I needed a more subtle approach. I had to make him believe that he had gotten away with everything, that I was still the oblivious wife, so that I could deliver the most devastating blow when he least expected it. I started with small changes. I acted like everything was fine between us, like I had no idea what he had been up to. I was calm, collected, and methodical in my interactions with him. I didn't want him to suspect anything. He would still go on his business trips, still have his late nights, and I would be right here playing the role of the trusting wife. But inside I was calculating, biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came sooner than I had expected. One evening, Jason told me that he would be away for the weekend, attending another work event in a city I had never heard of. He seemed casual about it, as if nothing was amiss. But I knew this trip wasn't about work. I knew it was another weekend with her. And I was determined to make sure that this time, Jason wouldn't be the one controlling the narrative. I had a plan, and it involved the hotel he would be staying at. I wasn't going to just let him disappear for the weekend without consequences. I had already called ahead, posing as someone from his office, and arranged a little surprise for him. I'd made sure the hotel staff was prepared, ready to give him a special welcome that would throw him off guard. They were instructed to treat him with extra attention, offer him an upgraded suite, and most importantly, leave a gift waiting for him in the room. It wasn't just any gift, though. It was a letter that would be the beginning of his downfall. The letter I crafted was a carefully worded message, one that looked innocent enough at first. But beneath the surface it would cut deep. It was addressed to him from the secret admirer he had been meeting with. I included intimate details from their conversations, details that only the two of them knew. The letter would make him realize in no uncertain terms that I knew everything. It was a brilliant move, one that would catch him completely off guard and shatter the illusion he had so carefully built. I spent days preparing for the weekend. I was methodical, careful, and precise. I had arranged everything down to the smallest detail. I even went so far as to track his flight, making sure I knew exactly when he would be arriving at the hotel. I needed to know that everything would unfold according to plan. I had no room for mistakes. My emotions, though still raw, were under control. This was not about emotion anymore. This was about execution. I couldn't afford to let my anger cloud my judgment. As the weekend approached, I found myself filled with a strange sense of calm. I wasn't nervous or anxious, I was focused. I had spent so long letting Jason's actions hurt me, letting him believe that I was weak and naive. But now the tables had turned. He would no longer hold the power. I would be the one in control, orchestrating every step of this plan with precision. The night before Jason's trip, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went to bed early, curled up in the covers, and fell into a restless sleep. I had no intention of confronting him that night. I needed him to leave first. I needed to know that he was out of my life, at least temporarily, before I executed my final move. The following morning I watched him pack his suitcase, none the wiser. He kissed me goodbye, telling me to take care of myself, but I saw the glint in his eye. He was so sure that I had no idea. But I did. The hours dragged by as I waited for him to reach his destination. I could feel my pulse quicken as the time drew closer. The hotel was expecting him now. The staff was ready. The letter was waiting. Everything was set in motion. When Jason finally checked into the hotel, everything unfolded just as I had planned. The front desk gave him the upgraded room and he was left alone with the letter. I waited in silence, feeling the tension build inside me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that when he read that letter, everything would change. And when I saw him again, he would no longer be the man I had married. He would be the man who had betrayed me, exposed for all to see. And I would finally have the upper hand. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. Jason had landed at the hotel, completely unaware of what awaited him. I sat in the quiet of my home, an unsettling calm washing over me as the seconds ticked by. My heart pounded, but there was a satisfaction in it. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about regaining control, about taking back the power that Jason had stolen from me. I had orchestrated this to perfection, and now, it was his turn to face the consequences of his actions. I kept my phone close, waiting for any sign that my plan was unfolding as I had imagined. There was no turning back now. The hotel had confirmed that everything was in place. The letter, the special attention he would receive, and the gift waiting for him in his room. I had spent hours crafting that letter, making sure it was just the right balance of subtlety and sharpness. I needed it to expose him, to make him feel every ounce of the hurt he had caused, without him realizing that I was the one pulling the strings. As I waited, my mind kept replaying the moment when I first saw that image of Jason with the other woman. I thought of all the nights he had spent away from me, all the lies he had told and the trust he had broken. I remembered how he'd always promised that he would be there for me, how he'd assured me that nothing could ever come between us. But now I knew better. His promises were empty, and the love I thought we shared was nothing more than a facade. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about strategy. And I would make sure my revenge was as precise as it was satisfying. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from the hotel staff. He's arrived and checked in. The letter has been placed in the room. My pulse quickened. He was there reading the letter. The first blow had been struck, and now I could only imagine the look on his face as he read the words I had carefully written for him. It was surreal, knowing that the man I had loved was now in the process of realizing just how much I knew about his betrayal. I couldn't help but picture his reaction. Would he feel a pang of guilt? Would he panic? I had no idea, but I knew one thing for sure. This would shake him to his core. He had been so confident, so sure that he could slip away unnoticed. But now he would have to face the truth, face the reality of the hurt he had caused. And there was no escaping it. He couldn't just brush it off. He couldn't just spin his lies like he always did. This time I was in control. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the hotel staff. He's left the room in a hurry. The staff say he seemed agitated. We will keep an eye on the situation. My stomach flipped. Agitated? That was an understatement. Jason was unraveling, and I could practically hear the tension in his voice as he realized that his world was crumbling. I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. For once, the tables were turned and I was the one calling the shots. I sat there staring at my phone, waiting for him to call. I knew he would. Jason wasn't the type to just let things go. He had to be in control, and I had just shattered that illusion. I could only imagine what he was going through, how the lies he had told were now coming back to haunt him. Then the phone rang. I didn't hesitate. I answered it quickly, trying to keep my voice steady, but there was a slight tremor in it. Jason's voice came through, sharp and frantic. "Molly, where are you?" he asked, his tone unnervingly calm, almost like he was trying to regain control. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "What's wrong, Jason?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. I could hear the tension in his voice, the way he was struggling to keep his composure. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Listen," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "there's been a misunderstanding. I don't know how it happened, but you have to trust me. It's not what it looks like." The audacity of it. Even now, after everything, he was still trying to cover his tracks. "Trust you?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "You've lied to me for months, Jason. I've seen the truth, and now you're telling me to trust you." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him scrambling for words, trying to find a way to make this go away. "Molly, please," he said, his voice desperate now. "I swear I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I was confused. I thought, "Don't even try, Jason." I cut him off, my anger rising now. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to lie your way out of it. I know everything." For the first time in our relationship, I felt a sense of power, a sense of finality. I wasn't the one caught in the lie anymore. I wasn't the one left in the dark, in the cold, begging for answers. Jason had no idea what to do now. He thought he could keep playing his games, but I had turned the tables. And now he was the one facing the consequences. I want you to listen very carefully, I continued, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. This is over, Jason. You've made your choices and now you have to deal with the fallout. You've lost everything, your lies, your secrets, your so-called affair. It's all out in the open now. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if he had hung up. But then I heard his voice again, low and shaking. Molly, But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear his apologies, his excuses. This wasn't about redemption. This was about justice, about making him understand the pain he had caused. Goodbye, Jason, I said and hung up the phone. I sat there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my mind racing. It was over. The truth had been exposed and there was no going back. The satisfaction I felt was bittersweet. It wasn't the kind of victory I had imagined, but it was a victory nonetheless. Jason had been forced to confront the truth, and I had made him realize the consequences of his actions. As I leaned back in my chair, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it was all still there, but now it didn't matter. I had taken control. I had reclaimed my power. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The phone call ended with a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. Jason's desperate pleas were still ringing in my ears, but I was already moving past them. The person I had once loved, my husband, my partner, was no longer a part of my life. His actions, his lies, and his deceit had already sealed our fate, and no amount of regret or apologetic words could undo what had been done. It was over. The end of our marriage, the end of my trust, the end of my belief in what we had built together. As I sat there, the weight of everything settled in. I had carried the pain of his betrayal for so long, burying it beneath my grief for my father. But now that the dust had settled and the confrontation was behind me, I could feel the relief washing over me, almost as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The anger that had been simmering for so long had given way to something else, something I wasn't sure I had expected. There was peace, quiet, a sense of closure that felt almost too foreign to embrace. I had fought for myself, for my dignity, and I had come out stronger on the other side. I couldn't lie to myself. There was still a part of me that missed him. The man I had married, the one I had believed in so fiercely, was gone. But in his place stood the reality of who he truly was, a man who had chosen to break my heart for his own selfish reasons. The man I had once loved was no more than a memory now, a faded image I could barely recognize. And that was okay. I didn't need him in my life anymore. I had learned that the hard way, but now I had no choice but to accept it. But as I stood up and walked through our empty house, I realized that this was more than just the end of a relationship. This was the end of a chapter of my life, one that I had once believed would stretch on for years to come. And yet here I was standing at the threshold of something new. I had been broken by his betrayal, yes, but I was also free. Free from the lies, free from the doubts, and free to rebuild my life in a way that I hadn't thought possible before. The days that followed were a blur of emotions and decisions. I had to figure out the next steps, what to do with the house, where to go from here, and how to heal the wounds that had been left behind. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to let Jason's actions define me. I wasn't going to be the woman who was forever marked by her husband's betrayal. I was going to take control of my life, of my future, and I was going to do it on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, I found a sense of clarity that I had never expected. I took time for myself, time to grieve not just my father's death, but also the end of a relationship that had meant everything to me. But I also took time to rediscover who I was outside of that marriage. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost in the process of loving Jason, how much of my own identity had been overshadowed by the role I had played as his wife. Now I was free to explore who I was, what I wanted, and where I wanted to go. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living for myself. Jason, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well. The fallout from the exposure of his lies had been swift and unforgiving. His so-called affair had been laid bare for everyone to see, and the shame of it all had followed him like a dark cloud. He had tried to apologize, tried to explain himself, but there was no coming back from what he had done. The truth was out and it couldn't be erased. The relationships he had built, the trust he had once commanded, were all destroyed in an instant. He had lost everything, not just me but the life he had so carelessly thrown away. I didn't know what would happen to him next, and honestly I didn't care. His actions had consequences, and those consequences were his to deal with. But I had learned something important through all of this. I had to focus on myself, on my own healing, and on moving forward. I had spent so long putting others before me, allowing myself to be consumed by the pain of my father's death and the betrayal of my husband. But now I was reclaiming my life. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel a sense of normalcy return to my life. I started working on new projects, things I had put off while I had been in the relationship with Jason. I reconnected with old friends, rekindling relationships that had fallen by the wayside. I spent more time doing the things that made me happy. Reading, writing, exploring new hobbies, and most importantly, learning to trust myself again. For the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I was becoming. I had faced the worst that life had thrown at me and had come out stronger on the other side. But there were moments when the memories of Jason still crept in. The times we had shared, the promises we had made, it was hard to completely erase those from my mind. Yet, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that the pain had dulled. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't as sharp as it had once been. I had forgiven myself for being deceived, for trusting the wrong person, and for letting myself be taken advantage of. I couldn't change the past, but I could control how I moved forward. And that was enough. I had learned to let go. And with that, I found freedom. I no longer felt like I was tethered to the past, to the betrayal, to the pain. I was no longer the victim in my own story. I was the author of my own future, and that future was filled with endless possibilities. And as I stood in my new life, ready to take on whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer afraid. The road ahead may not always be easy, but it would be mine to walk, and I would walk it with my head held high. He thought he could break me by cheating with her, but I exposed every secret, destroyed his reputation, and walked away as he watched his perfect world crumble to dust. Hey beautiful people. Your support means everything to us. Help us reach our next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. I'm Victoria Pierce, 31, and until 6 months ago, I was living what most would call the American dream. Senior partner at Pierce & Montgomery Consulting, a corner office overlooking Boston Harbor, and engaged to James Anderson, the man who would soon learn that breaking me would be the biggest mistake of his life. Our love story had been the kind that made it into wedding magazines. High school sweethearts who reconnected at our 10-year reunion, both successful in our own rights, both ready for what we thought would be forever. James had built himself into one of Boston's most prominent corporate lawyers, his name whispered in reverent tones across courthouse corridors. I had inherited my father's consulting firm and transformed it into a powerhouse of innovation. Together we were unstoppable, or so I thought. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on his collar or suspicious late-night call. Instead, it was a simple notification on his iPad that he'd forgotten to disconnect from our shared Apple account. Your Uber receipt, drop off at 42 Beacon Street. That wouldn't have meant anything if he hadn't told me he was in New York for a critical deposition that day. I remember sitting in our luxury penthouse, feeling the leather of our $12,000 couch beneath my fingers, staring at that notification until my eyes burned. 42 Beacon Street. The address of my best friend and maid of honor, Christine Warner. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. The old Victoria might have, but something inside me shifted that day. A cold, calculating voice whispered, watch, wait, gather. And so I did. For the next 2 weeks, I became a silent observer in my own life. I noticed how James's New York trips always coincided with Christine's yoga retreats. I saw the subtle glances they exchanged at charity galas, the way their fingers brushed when passing drinks. Each observation was a dagger, but I transformed my pain into purpose. The breaking point, the moment that would set my revenge in motion, came during our engagement party at the Boston Harbor Hotel. 500 guests, the city's elite, all gathered to celebrate what they thought was the merger of two powerful families. I'd spent months planning it, ensuring every detail was perfect, from the imported French champagne to the string quartet playing our favorite pieces. James had insisted on giving a speech. He stood there, champagne flute in hand, looking devastatingly handsome in his Tom Ford tuxedo, speaking about loyalty, trust, and eternal love. And there, in the third row, Christine sat wearing the emerald necklace I'd later discover was his gift to her. Bought with the joint account we'd opened for our wedding expenses. To my beautiful Victoria, he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, you're not just my future wife. You're my rock, my conscience, my everything. I promised to be faithful, honest, and true until my last breath. The applause was deafening. The irony was suffocating. Later that night, as guests danced and celebrated, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I took the elevator to the hotel's security office. Being the daughter of one of their biggest investors has its perks, like access to security footage. And there it was, in crisp high definition. James and Christine sneaking into one of the hotel's luxury suites 2 hours before the party. The timestamp matched perfectly with his emergency client call. I watched the footage 3 times, not because I needed to confirm what I saw, but because I wanted to memorize every detail of the moment that would justify what I was about to do. The way he checked the corridor before entering, how she giggled as he pulled her inside. Each detail would fuel my resolve. That night, as James slept soundly beside me, probably dreaming of his perfect double life, I began plotting. The prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on signing, meant to protect his assets, would become my first weapon. You see, there was a morality clause his lawyers had added, thinking it would protect him. They never imagined it would be his undoing. I started small, methodically. First, I hired the best private investigator in Boston, not to follow James and Christine. No, I already knew enough about their affair, but to dig into James's law practice. A man arrogant enough to cheat on his fiancée with her best friend would surely have other secrets. Within weeks, the pieces started falling into place. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The client funds that mysteriously disappeared and reappeared. The witness tampering of evidence in 3 high-profile cases. Each discovery was a pearl, and I was slowly stringing together a necklace that would eventually choke his career. Christine wasn't innocent either. As my maid of honor and the CFO of her family's investment firm, she had access to sensitive information about both our personal lives and various corporate dealings. What she didn't know was that I'd kept records of every conversation where she'd drunkenly bragged about insider trading, every email where she'd accidentally revealed confidential information. The beauty of it all? Neither of them suspected a thing. I maintained my role perfectly, the devoted fiancé, the trusting best friend. I smiled through wedding planning sessions, laughed at their inside jokes, and played the perfect hostess at our dinner parties. All while documenting, recording, and building my case. James thought he could break me by betraying everything we'd built together. He thought I was just another trophy to display at corporate events, too blindly in love to see through his facade. Christine believed our decade-long friendship would make me an easy target, someone too loyal to ever suspect betrayal. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble. But they were about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones you should fear the most. Because while they were playing house with their secret affair, I was constructing something far more intricate. Their complete and utter destruction. As I organize these files on my desk tonight, each one carefully labeled and dated, I can't help but smile. The engagement party was 3 months ago. Tomorrow phase 1 of my plan begins. And by the time I'm done, James Anderson and Christine Warner will learn that hell hath no fury like a woman they thought they could break. Phase 1 began with a simple email. Dear Mr. Harrison, I believe there are some irregularities in the Anderson-Pierce merger case that require your immediate attention. I sent it at exactly 8:15 a.m., knowing James's mentor and managing partner would be enjoying his morning coffee while reviewing case files. The email came from an anonymous account, but the attachments were anything but mysterious. Detailed records of James's creative accounting with client funds, carefully documented over the past 3 months. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the delicious process of discovering just how deep James's corruption ran. Remember that private investigator I hired? Marcus turned out to be worth every penny of his astronomical fee. While tracking James's movements, he discovered something fascinating. My fiancé had a peculiar habit of visiting a certain safety deposit box at Boston First National every Tuesday at 11 a.m., like clockwork. The same bank where our firm handled several major corporate accounts. Took 2 weeks of careful manipulation, but I finally had my opening. Honey, I'd said one Monday evening, massaging his shoulders as he reviewed case files, I need you to meet with the Carter Industries team tomorrow morning. They're threatening to pull their account. James had protested, of course. I have a crucial meeting at 11. More crucial than a $50 million account? I'd asked innocently, knowing he couldn't refuse. While he was busy saving our biggest client relationship, which was never actually in danger. Marcus paid a visit to the bank. Amazing what people will do when presented with a court order. Even if that order was crafted using James's own legal letterhead and signature, which I'd collected from our countless wedding planning documents. The contents of that safety deposit box were like Christmas come early. Detailed records of every client fund he'd borrowed, every case he'd compromised, every judge he'd influenced. James had kept meticulous records of his misdeeds, probably as insurance against his co-conspirators. How ironic that his own paranoia would become his undoing. But the real gold mine came from an unexpected source. Christine's assistant, Jenny. Poor, overlooked Jenny, who Christine had berated publicly at last year's Christmas party. All it took was a chance meeting at her favorite coffee shop, a sympathetic ear, and a suggestion that her impressive skills were being wasted. Within a week, Jenny was my new personal assistant, bringing with her a treasure trove of Christine's confidential files. Miss Pierce, Jenny had said one evening, staying late to help me organize wedding files, "I think you should see this." She handed me a USB drive containing emails between Christine and James dating back 18 months. Not just their love affair. That was old news. But detailed discussions of insider trading schemes they'd been running together. James would pass on confidential information from his corporate cases, and Christine would make strategic investments just days before major mergers and acquisitions went public. I spent that night in my office, methodically copying and categorizing every damning piece of evidence. The next morning I smiled sweetly as James kissed me goodbye, his lips still stained with Christine's signature red lipstick from their morning rendezvous. "Don't work too hard, darling," I'd said, knowing exactly how he'd be spending his lunch hour. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Through Marcus, I discovered that James had been embezzling from the firm's client trust accounts, a cardinal sin in the legal world. Through Jenny, I learned that Christine had been falsifying corporate records to hide their illegal trading activities. And through my own careful observation, I documented every meeting, every call, every suspicious transaction. But the masterstroke came from an unexpected quarter. Remember that morality clause in our prenuptial agreement? I hired 3 separate legal teams to review it, each without knowledge of the others. Their unanimous conclusion? The clause wasn't just about infidelity. It extended to professional misconduct. If either party engaged in activities that could bring public disgrace to the other, the offending party would forfeit all shared assets and be liable for substantial penalties. James had insisted on that clause, convinced he was protecting himself from any potential gold digger tendencies I might harbor. The irony of using his own legal paranoia against him was almost poetic. I organized everything into 3 separate packages. The first, containing evidence of James's legal misconduct, would go to the State Bar Association and the firm's ethics committee. The second, documenting their insider trading scheme, was destined for the SEC. The third, proving their affair and violations of the morality clause, would go to our family lawyers. But timing was crucial. Too soon and they might find a way to wiggle out of it. Too late and they might have already moved more assets offshore. I needed a catalyst, something that would make the impact impossible to ignore. That opportunity came in the form of the annual Bar Association Gala, the biggest event in Boston's legal calendar. James was scheduled to give the keynote speech, announcing his promotion to named partner. Christine would be there too, seated at our table in her role as both client and friend. It would be their moment of triumph, and their perfect downfall. The week before the gala, I began laying the groundwork. Anonymous tips to key journalists about upcoming scandals in Boston's legal community. Subtle hints to the firm's other partners about concerning patterns in recent cases. A quiet word with the Bar Association's ethics committee about reviewing certain trust account transactions. I also made sure to be the perfect fiancé. I helped James rehearse his speech, offered to coordinate with Christine on the seating arrangements, even bought a new Valentino gown for the occasion. Blood red because symbolism matters. The night before the gala, as James slept soundly beside me, I made final preparations. Every email was scheduled, every document ready to be released. I thought I might feel nervous or guilty, but all I felt was a calm certainty. They thought they could break me, use me, discard me. Instead, they had created their own destroyer. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, remembering the naive woman I'd been just months ago. She was gone, replaced by someone stronger, Someone who understood that true power lies not in love or trust, but in knowledge and patience. James and Christine had taught me that lesson well, and tomorrow they would learn how well I'd learned it. As I climbed back into bed, James stirred slightly. "Everything okay, baby?" he mumbled. I kissed his cheek, tasting the bitter victory to come. "Everything's perfect, darling. Just perfect." Because tomorrow, at exactly 7:45 p.m., while James would be stepping up to the podium to give the speech of his career, his entire world would begin to crumble. And I would be there watching as the man who thought he could break me realized too late that he'd broken himself instead. 7:30 p.m. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton buzzed with anticipation. Boston's legal elite mingled over champagne and carefully crafted hors d'oeuvres, unaware they were about to witness the destruction of one of their own. I stood by the bar, appearing to adjust my red Valentino gown in the mirrored wall, but actually watching James and Christine's reflections as they worked the room separately, maintaining their careful charade. "Your usual, Miss Pierce?" the bartender asked. "Just water tonight, Thomas. I want to stay sharp." I needed full clarity to savor every moment of what was about to unfold. 7:40 p.m. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "Packages delivered. Right on schedule." The evidence had been simultaneously sent to the State Bar Association, SEC, and the firm's managing partners. The digital time bombs were set. James approached, radiating confidence in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. "Ready for the big moment, darling?" He kissed my cheek, his cologne mingling with a faint trace of Christine's perfume. How sloppy they'd become, so certain of their invulnerability. "Absolutely, sweetheart. This is everything you've worked for." I smiled, touching the Windsor knot of his tie, the one I'd given him for our engagement because irony should be appreciated. 7:43 p.m. Harrison, the managing partner, was already frowning at his phone. He excused himself from a conversation with a judge, walking briskly toward the service exit. Right about now, he'd be reading about how his star protégé had been systematically defrauding clients and the firm. 7:44 p.m. Christine's phone buzzed. I watched her face pale as she read what I assumed was the SEC's immediate response to the evidence of insider trading. She looked up, catching James's eye across the room. He gave her a slight nod, oblivious to the fact that their secret signals were now as transparent to me as glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, "please take your seats. Our keynote address will begin momentarily." I touched James's arm. "You should head up there, darling. This is your moment." He squeezed my hand, flashing that $1,000,000 smile that had once made my heart race. Now it just reminded me of all his lies. "I love you," he said. "I know," I replied, because technically it wasn't a lie. I did know. I knew exactly what his version of love was worth. 7:45 p.m. James took the podium just as the first phones began to buzz. The timing was exquisite. Every major news outlet in Boston receiving anonymous tips about the scandal simultaneously, complete with documentation. I watched as reporters in the room began whispering, their fingers flying over their phones. Distinguished colleagues, honored guests. James began his carefully rehearsed speech, still unaware of the tsunami approaching. The side door burst open. Harrison, his face ashen, strode purposefully toward the podium. 2 security guards flanked him. In the corner, I noticed Christine already being approached by men in suits. SEC agents move surprisingly quickly when given concrete evidence of major securities fraud. "James," Harrison's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Step down." The confusion on James's face was priceless. "I'm sorry." "Step down. Now." Harrison's voice left no room for argument. The room erupted in murmurs as James was escorted from the podium. Christine was already being let out through a side door, her mascara beginning to run. Their perfectly constructed world was crumbling in real time, and I had front row seats. "Victoria," James called out as they led him past me, "something's wrong. Call Jerry at the firm, get him to—" "I'm afraid Jerry can't help you," I said softly, letting the mask slip just enough for him to see the truth in my eyes. "No one can." The recognition dawned slowly, then all at once. I watched as understanding crashed over him like a wave, every late-night client meeting, every stolen moment with Christine, every fraudulent transaction coming back to haunt him in one terrible moment of clarity. "You," he whispered, his face draining of color. "But how?" I stepped closer, my voice for his ears alone. You should have remembered, darling. The devil is in the details. And I've always been very, very good with details. The security guards pulled him away before he could respond. I stood there, champagne flute in hand, as chaos erupted around me. Reporters were already pushing forward, shouting questions. Partners huddled in corners, frantically making calls. The prestigious gala had transformed into a feeding frenzy. I felt a presence beside me and turned to find Jenny, my faithful assistant, looking concerned. Miss Pierce, there are reporters asking for comments. Should I give them my prepared statement? I said calmly. The one about being shocked and devastated by these revelations. Make sure to emphasize that I'm cooperating fully with all investigations. She nodded, understanding perfectly. We'd rehearsed this after all. My role as the betrayed fiancé was just as carefully crafted as every other aspect of this evening. Within an hour, the ballroom had emptied, leaving behind half-filled champagne glasses and the debris of shattered reputations. I sat alone at what had been our table, fingering the engagement ring I would return tomorrow through our lawyers. My phone buzzed, a news alert. Breaking. Prominent Boston attorney James Anderson arrested on multiple fraud charges. Below it, another headline. Major investment firm CEO Christine Warner implicated in insider trading scandal. I scrolled through the notifications. The evidence was being reported exactly as I'd planned, each revelation building on the last, creating an inescapable web of corruption. By morning, there wouldn't be a law firm in Boston willing to represent either of them. The prenup's morality clause would ensure I kept everything. The penthouse, the vacation homes, the art collection. Not that I wanted them. This was never about money. It was about justice, served cold and precise. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the ballroom's ornate mirrors. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had discovered her fiancé's betrayal months ago. She was stronger, sharper, refined by the fire of betrayal into something magnificent and terrible. James had thought he could break me. Christine had believed our friendship was my weakness. Together they had assumed I would crumble, become another sad story at cocktail parties about the naive woman who lost everything. Instead they had created their own destruction. Every secret they'd whispered, every lie they'd told, every betrayal they'd planned, I had transformed them all into weapons and turned them back upon their creators. As I stepped into the cool Boston night, my phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number, Christine's private line. Why? I smiled, typing back 4 words before blocking the number forever. Because you taught me how. The valet brought my car around. A new Mercedes, bought with the signing bonus from the job offer I'd accepted in New York last week. Tomorrow the press would describe me as the victim of an elaborate fraud. In a month, I'd be the phoenix who rose from the ashes, taking a prestigious position at a rival firm. In a year, few would remember I had ever been James Anderson's fiancée. But James and Christine? They would remember. Every day in their prison cells, they would remember the woman they thought they could break and how spectacularly their plan had backfired. 1 month after the gala, I sat in my new corner office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, reading the latest headlines about the Anderson-Warner scandal. The Wall Street Journal had dubbed it the romance of fraud, detailing how a prominent attorney and investment firm CEO had orchestrated one of Boston's biggest financial schemes while carrying on an illicit affair. Miss Pierce. My new assistant, Sarah, appeared at the door. The Boston Globe is on line 1. They're doing a follow-up piece and, no comments beyond our official statement, I replied, not looking up from my laptop. The statement in question had been crafted by a team of PR experts. Ms. Pierce continues to cooperate with authorities and requests privacy during this difficult time. Short, professional, and perfectly designed to make me appear as the dignified victim. The truth was far more satisfying. James's arrest had triggered a domino effect that exceeded even my careful planning. The FBI had seized his offshore accounts. All of them, not just the ones I'd known about. Turned out my ex-fiancé had been running schemes that made my discoveries look like amateur hour. The prestigious law firm where he'd been about to make named partner was now under federal investigation. Christine hadn't fared any better. The SEC investigation I'd triggered had uncovered a pattern of insider trading going back years before she'd even met James. Her family's investment firm was hemorrhaging clients, their reputation in tatters. Last I heard, her father had cut her off completely, leaving her to face federal charges without the backing of the family fortune. My phone buzzed. A text from Jenny, who I'd helped place at a top PR firm in Boston. Check your email. You'll want to see this. The email contained a court filing. James was attempting to claim that I had orchestrated everything, that he was the victim of our elaborate setup. I couldn't help but laugh. Even his own lawyer had advised against it. After all, how could the brilliant, sophisticated James Anderson claim he'd been outsmarted by his simple, trusting fiancée? Miss Pierce. Sarah again. Mr. Harrison is here to see you. Now this was interesting. James's former mentor had flown to New York unannounced. I straightened my Chanel blazer and nodded. Send him in. Richard Harrison looked older than he had at the gala, the scandal having carved new lines in his face. He took the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation. Impressive view, he said, gesturing to the Manhattan skyline. Better than the one in Boston, I replied coolly. We both knew this wasn't a social call. You know, he began, studying me with new eyes. I've spent weeks trying to figure out how we missed it. How James managed to hide his activities for so long. But that's not the real question, is it? I raised an eyebrow, waiting. The real question is how you found everything we missed. How you managed to unravel years of careful deception in just a few months. Perhaps you weren't looking closely enough, I suggested. Or perhaps you were looking for the wrong things. He nodded slowly. We were looking for a criminal mastermind. We should have been looking for a broken heart. Is that what you think this was about? A broken heart? I allowed myself a small smile. You still don't understand, Richard. This was never about heartbreak. It was about justice. Justice. He barked out a laugh. You destroyed him. The firm is under federal investigation. Our reputation. Your reputation was destroyed the moment you made James a partner without proper due diligence. I cut in. I simply exposed what was already there. Harrison leaned forward, his voice dropping. What do you want? Money? A partnership? Name your price to make this go away. Now it was my turn to laugh. Make it go away? Richard, this isn't some minor indiscretion that can be swept under the rug. Your star protégé defrauded clients, compromised cases, and corrupted the very justice system he swore to uphold. Christine betrayed not just me, but every investor who trusted her with their money. They made their choices. Now they face the consequences. And you, he challenged. What consequences do you face? I stood, walking to the window. 40 floors below, Manhattan hummed with energy. My consequence was learning that the man I loved and the friend I trusted were frauds. But unlike them, I turned that lesson into strength. You're just as calculating as they were, Harrison said, rising to leave. No, Richard. I'm better. I turned back to face him. They calculated how to deceive. I calculated how to reveal truth. There's a difference. After he left, I opened my desk drawer and took out the engagement ring, the one I'd kept as a reminder. Tomorrow it would be auctioned off, the proceeds donated to a fund for victims of financial fraud. A final public twist of the knife. My phone buzzed again, another news alert. Christine had accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against James in exchange for a reduced sentence. Honor among thieves, it seemed, was as false as their other pretenses. I opened my laptop, checking the secure email account I'd created months ago. One new message from Marcus, my PI. Jay's appeal denied. Full sentence upheld. 15 to 20 years. 15 years. I did the math in my head. James would be 50 before he saw freedom again. His law career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future reduced to prison visits and regrets. Christine would serve less time, but her world was equally shattered. No family support, no career prospects, no future in the financial sector. Some might call it excessive. I called it appropriate. Sarah appeared one last time. Your car is here, Miss Pierce. The board meeting at Anderson Cooper starts in an hour. I smiled at the irony. I'd been hired to help rebuild the very investment firm that Christine's actions had nearly destroyed. Life had a poetry to it sometimes. As I gathered my things, I caught my reflection in the office windows. The woman looking back wasn't a victim or a survivor. She was a force of nature, shaped by betrayal into something unstoppable. James had thought he could break me with his infidelity. Christine had thought she could break me with her betrayal. Instead, they taught me an invaluable lesson. True strength isn't in maintaining illusions of trust and love, but in the cold, clear pursuit of justice. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from an unknown number. "You've ruined everything." I didn't need to ask who it was. I simply typed back, "No, James. You did that yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." Then I blocked the number, straightened my blazer, and headed to my meeting. After all, I had an empire to build. One constructed not on deception and betrayal, but on the solid foundation of lessons learned from those who thought they could break me. They never realized that sometimes, what you think will break a person only serves to make them invincible. 3 years can change everything. I stood at the podium of the New York Financial Forum, preparing to deliver the keynote address. Ironically, the same position James had been in when his world collapsed. But unlike him, I had earned this moment honestly. And now, please welcome Victoria Pierce, CEO of Pierce Global Consulting and Wall Street Journal's Financial Innovator of the Year. The announcer's voice boomed across the grand ballroom. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I was supposed to be Mrs. James Anderson, the supportive wife of a corrupt Boston lawyer. Now I was Victoria Pierce, the woman who had transformed a family consulting firm into a billion-dollar global enterprise. "Thank you," I began, surveying the crowd. "Today I want to talk about integrity in business. About how trust, once broken, can never truly be repaired. But something stronger can be built from its ashes." My eyes caught a familiar face in the crowd, Christine's father, Robert Warner. His own company had barely survived the scandal, and here he was forced to listen to me speak about integrity. Life did have a wonderful sense of humor. 3 years ago I learned a valuable lesson about trust, I continued. I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can be your greatest teachers. Not in the ways they intend, but in the ways they fail. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in the room knew my story, or thought they did. The jilted fiancé who rose from the ashes of scandal to become a business powerhouse. What they didn't know was how meticulously I'd planned each step of my ascent. After James's conviction and Christine's plea deal, I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. Every client they'd betrayed, every investor they'd defrauded, I'd approached personally. I turned their victims into my allies, their losses into my stepping stones. Success isn't built on deception, I continued, my voice carrying across the silent room. It's built on the understanding that every action has consequences. Every choice creates ripples that can become tsunamis. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. Probably another message from James's lawyer. He was up for parole next month, still claiming he'd been set up. His appeals had become almost amusing, each one more desperate than the last. The evidence I'd gathered had been too thorough, too precise. He wasn't just serving time for fraud, he was serving time for arrogance. Christine had been released 6 months ago, her shortened sentence courtesy of her cooperation. Last I heard, she was working as a junior accountant in Nebraska, about as far from Wall Street as one could get. Her testimony against James had burned every bridge in the financial world. Leadership isn't about power, I told my captivated audience. It's about responsibility. About understanding that every decision we make affects not just ourselves, but everyone who trusts us with their futures. In the front row I spotted Marcus, my former PI turned head of corporate security. He'd helped me transform my father's modest consulting firm into an empire built on uncovering corporate fraud. Who better to spot deception than those who'd mastered exposing it? Jenny, now my chief of staff, stood at the back of the room, tablet in hand. She'd risen through the ranks exactly as I'd planned, her loyalty rewarded with a partnership stake. We'd become known as the firm that couldn't be fooled, because we knew every trick in the book. 3 years ago, I continued, someone very close to me said that love was about trust. He was wrong. Love, like business, is about truth. And truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. The audience applauded, not realizing I was describing their own futures. My firm had already begun investigating half the companies represented in the room. In the world of corporate finance, everyone had secrets. The difference was, now I was the one exposing them, legally, methodically, and profitably. After the speech at the reception, Robert Warner approached me. His once proud bearing now carried the weight of his daughter's disgrace. "You've done well for yourself," he said, swirling his scotch. "Better than anyone expected," I agreed. "Including your daughter." He flinched. "Christine. She asks about you sometimes. In her letters. Does she ask about James too?" I kept my tone light, curious. No. He finished his drink. She finally understood what you knew all along. He was using both of you. I smiled, remembering Christine's last letter sent just before her release. You were right. He never loved either of us. He only loved himself. Mr. Warner, I said gently, your daughter taught me something valuable. She taught me that betrayal doesn't have to destroy you. It can remake you into something stronger. He nodded slowly. You're not what they think you are you? The victim who got lucky. No, I agreed. I'm what they made me. Someone who learned to turn betrayal into opportunity. Later that night, in my penthouse overlooking Central Park, bought with the profits from a company built on exposing people like James and Christine, I received an email from the parole board. James's hearing had been scheduled. They wanted to know if I'd make a statement. I opened my laptop and began to type. To the honorable members of the board, I write not in anger or vengeance but in concern for justice. James Anderson isn't just a man who committed fraud. He's a man who believed himself above the law, above truth, above consequences. My phone rang, a secure line used only for our most sensitive corporate investigations. Another CEO caught in a web of lies, another company about to face its day of reckoning. I smiled as I answered it, already knowing how this would play out. This was my legacy, not as the woman they thought they could break, but as the force they had unwittingly created. Every investigation we launched, every fraud we uncovered, was a tribute to the lessons they taught me. James had thought he could break me with betrayal. Christine had thought she could break me with deceit. Instead, they had forged me into something unbreakable, a woman who had turned their weapons against not just them, but against every corrupt executive and fraudulent scheme in the financial world. I closed my laptop, the parole board statement complete. Tomorrow it would remind them that actions have consequences, that trust, once broken, creates something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous than love. They thought they could break me. Instead, they created an empire built on exposing people exactly like them. And in the end, that was the sweetest revenge of all. 5 years to the day after the gala that changed everything, I received an unexpected package at my office. Inside was a worn leather journal, James's prison diary, sent by his mother after his death. He'd suffered a heart attack 3 months into his second year of parole, his body finally giving out under the weight of his shattered pride. I sat in my office watching the sun set over Manhattan, the journal unopened on my desk. The woman I'd been 8 years ago would have devoured it immediately, hungry for validation. But I'd learned that true power isn't in seeking validation. It's in being beyond the need for it. Miss Pierce. Jenny's voice came through the intercom. The Board of Ethics is ready for your testimony. Ah yes, another delicious irony. I'd been appointed to head the newly formed Wall Street Ethics Commission, tasked with preventing exactly the kind of fraud I'd once exposed. The predator turned guardian, a role I'd embraced with particular relish. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, I replied, finally opening the journal to its last entry, dated 2 days before his death. Victoria was right all along. The greatest prison isn't these walls. It's the knowledge that you built your own cage, brick by brick, lie by lie. She didn't destroy me. She simply showed everyone who I really was. I closed the journal, a faint smile playing at my lips. Even in death, James still didn't fully understand. I hadn't just exposed who he was, I'd become something he could never comprehend. A woman who'd turned betrayal into an art form. The ethics board meeting was being held, fittingly enough, in the same hotel where I'd once planned my wedding. As I walked through the marble lobby, I caught sight of my reflection. Designer suit, perfectly styled hair, the confident stride of someone who'd turned revenge into an empire. Christine was there, of course. After her release, she'd done the unthinkable, turned whistleblower. Now she worked for my firm's compliance division, using her intimate knowledge of financial fraud to prevent others from following her path. It wasn't forgiveness, it was pragmatism. Who better to catch a thief than a reformed one? Victoria, she nodded as I passed, her voice carrying the weight of our shared history. Christine, I replied coolly. How's the Anderson Cooper investigation coming along? She flinched slightly at the name. James's ghost still haunted us both, though in very different ways. 3 board members have agreed to testify. The evidence is comprehensive. It always is, I smiled, remembering how thoroughly she'd once hidden her own misdeeds. That's why we're the best at what we do. The boardroom fell silent as I took my place at the head of the table. Around me sat the titans of Wall Street, CEOs, regulators, and watchdogs, all here because I'd proven that no one was above scrutiny. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, we're here today to discuss integrity. Not just the integrity of our financial systems, but the integrity of our actions, our choices, our very souls. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the building where James's law firm had once stood. It was a coffee shop now, another empire fallen to dust. 8 years ago I learned that trust isn't given, it's earned. And once broken it becomes something else entirely. I let my gaze sweep the room. It becomes power. Robert Warner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His company had barely survived Christine's scandal, and now he served at my pleasure on the ethics board. Another piece in my collection of poetic justice. We're not here to punish, I continued, though everyone knew that was exactly what we did. We're here to protect. To ensure that what happened to me, what I allowed to happen, never happens to anyone else. The meeting proceeded exactly as I'd planned. 3 major firms were put on notice, their executives squirming as my team presented evidence of their indiscretions. This was my real revenge, not just against James and Christine, but against an entire system that enabled people like them. Later that evening, back in my penthouse, I finally read through James's journal. His words were a mixture of self-pity and belated revelation, each page a testament to a man who'd never truly understood the monster he'd created. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenny. Christine's testimony is complete. The Anderson Cooper case is ready to move forward. I smiled, remembering James's last attempt to contact me before his death. He'd sent a letter begging for forgiveness, claiming he'd changed. I'd sent it back unopened with a single note. Some changes come too late. Standing at my window watching the city lights twinkle like stars, I reflected on the journey. 8 years ago I'd been a woman in love, planning a future built on trust and dreams. Now I was something else entirely, a force of nature, a catalyst for change, a weapon forged in the fire of betrayal. James had thought he could break me by cheating with my best friend. Christine had thought she could break me by betraying our friendship. Instead, they'd created something far more dangerous than a broken woman. They'd created someone who understood that true power comes not from love or trust, but from the ability to turn pain into purpose. The journal's final pages contained a question James had written over and over. Why didn't she break? The answer was simple, though he'd never understood it. You can't break someone who learns to thrive on breaking others. Every company I'd investigated, every fraud I'd exposed, every corrupt executive I'd brought down, they were all extensions of that first perfect revenge. I picked up James's journal one last time, then dropped it into the shredder. The past was just that, past. I had built something far more valuable than revenge. A legacy of justice served cold and precise, to a world that had forgotten its meaning. They thought they could break me. Instead, they'd created an avenging angel, a guardian of truth in a world of lies. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all, not just surviving but thriving in ways they could never have imagined. Because sometimes, the woman you try to break becomes the woman who breaks everyone else. My parents disowned me for chasing my dreams. You'll come crawling back. But when I bought their house, they were speechless. Real estate. My brother snorted, setting his fork down with an exaggerated roll of his eyes. That's your big rebellion, Megan? You think flipping houses is going to replace a billion-dollar empire? My father didn't laugh. He just stared at me, unblinking, as if I were an insect beneath his shoe. And then he said the words that would burn themselves into my memory forever. You'll come crawling back. And when you do, we won't open the door. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. This story is about resilience, success, and proving that sometimes, the best revenge is living well. If you enjoy stories of empowerment and overcoming the odds, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us grow this incredible community. Now let's dive in. The weight of his voice pressed down on the dining room, final and absolute. The chandelier above cast sharp reflections on the polished mahogany table, its pristine surface a mirror of the carefully curated world my parents had built. One where power, status, and control dictated every move. And I was disrupting it. I gripped my fork tighter, feeling my pulse hammer against my skin. My mother hadn't even looked up, her wine glass delicately poised between her fingers. She preferred to watch these moments unfold from a distance, like an artist admiring the chaos of her own design. "I'm not asking for your approval," I said, my voice firm. "I'm telling you my decision." My father exhaled, slow and controlled, before setting down his napkin beside his plate. Across from me, Nathan leaned back, enjoying the spectacle. He had always played the role of the obedient son, the heir who would uphold the family's legacy. My refusal to do the same was nothing more than an amusing distraction to him. "Let me explain something to you, Megan," my father said, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "You are not built for survival. You grew up with privilege, with security. You have no idea what it means to fight for something." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had grown up surrounded by wealth, shielded from hardship. But that didn't mean I was incapable. It didn't mean I wasn't willing to learn, to struggle, to build something of my own. "I'm not afraid of starting from nothing," I said. "You should be." He leaned forward, his gaze razor sharp. "Because that's exactly what you'll have. No trust fund. No inheritance. No connections. You want to play entrepreneur? Fine. But don't expect to carry our name with you." A knot formed in my stomach. This was more than just a refusal of support. This was a severance. A declaration that I no longer belonged in this family. For a brief moment I hesitated. It would be so easy to step back into their carefully constructed world, to nod and accept the future they had laid out for me. A high-ranking position in the family business. A life of comfort, stability, and unchallenged luxury. But at what cost? A life where every decision was made for me, where my worth was measured by my compliance. Well, I had made my choice. "Then I guess this is it," I said, pushing back my chair. The sound of it scraping against the marble floor felt deafening. I stood, my legs steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I hope for your sake that you never need me the way you think I'll need you." My father's expression didn't change. My mother sipped her wine. Nathan chuckled under his breath. And just like that, I was no longer their daughter. Leaving it all behind. I packed in silence. My childhood room, once filled with traces of my life, books stacked on shelves, framed photographs of vacations long past, felt foreign now. The walls were too pristine, too perfect, as if they had never really belonged to me in the first place. A knock at the door. I turned to see Nathan leaning against the frame, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're actually doing this," he said, more amused than concerned. "I don't see another option." He exhaled, stepping inside. "You're making a mistake, Megan." I zipped up my suitcase. "We'll see about that." Nathan shook his head. "You think you're different, that you're some outlier who can succeed without the family name? You'll burn out within a year. Then what? Come crawling back." There it was again. That phrase. I met his gaze. "I won't crawl, Nathan. That's the difference between me and the rest of you. I'll build something on my own, and when I make it, you'll all have to watch." He smirked, stepping back. "Good luck with that." And then he was gone. The first steps into the unknown. The air outside was crisp, the night stretching endlessly before me as I walked toward my car. The house loomed behind me, its grand columns and sprawling estate bathed in golden light, a monument to everything I was leaving behind. I hesitated for only a second before opening the door and stepping inside. The engine hummed to life, a quiet reminder that this was the start of something new. Something uncertain. Something terrifying. I drove away without looking back. The reality of being alone. The first night was the hardest. The hotel room was small, impersonal, nothing like the luxury I had been accustomed to. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind buzzing with everything that had happened. I was really on my own. No money. No safety net. No family. Fear crept in, but I pushed it down. This was what I had chosen. And if I wanted to prove them wrong, I couldn't afford to break now. I reached for my phone and pulled up the real estate listings I had been studying for weeks. I had done my research, mapped out the market, planned my first move. I would start small. A single investment. A property I could flip, something manageable but with potential. I had nothing to lose. And everything to prove. I took a deep breath and dialed the number of the first seller on my list. A groggy voice answered on the other end. "Hello. Hi, I'm interested in the property you have listed. I'd like to schedule a viewing." Silence. Then a brief pause. All right. Tomorrow at noon? That works. Thank you. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the mirror. This was it. The first move in a long uphill battle. But no matter how hard it got, no matter how many times I failed, I would never crawl back. They had underestimated me. And one day they would see exactly what kind of mistake that was. I stared at my reflection in the hotel mirror. The person looking back at me was the same yet different. There was no safety net beneath me anymore, no cushion life waiting if I failed. This was it. Either I built something or I sank. The first property viewing was in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The house was nothing more than a neglected structure with peeling paint, a sagging roof, and a front yard swallowed by weeds. But I saw something else, a starting point. The real estate agent barely acknowledged me. He glanced at my clothes, my lack of a business suit, and his polite demeanor barely masked his doubt. "First-time investor?" he asked, the skepticism in his voice evident. I nodded. But not new to hard work. I ran my fingers along the cracked wooden doorframe, absorbing every imperfection. I didn't have much money, but I had enough for this. It was a risk. Everything in me screamed to hesitate, to reconsider. My father's voice echoed in my mind. "You'll never survive without us." I signed the papers that afternoon. The moment the keys hit my palm, reality set in. I had just spent nearly everything I had. There was no backup plan. No one to bail me out. I arrived at the property with nothing but a tool set, a bucket of paint, and determination. The first night I slept on the floor, surrounded by dust and uncertainty. The air smelled of mildew and old wood, and every creak of the house felt like a reminder of what was at stake. At dawn I started working. Days bled into nights as I scraped, hammered, and painted. I learned by doing. Watching videos, reading manuals, making mistakes and fixing them. My hands blistered, my muscles ached, but the house began to transform. It wasn't just about flipping a property anymore. It was about proving I belonged here. I lived off canned food and gas station coffee, every penny accounted for. I bartered when I could, negotiated with contractors when I couldn't do something myself. There were moments of doubt, times when exhaustion crept in and I questioned everything. Then came the first break. A local buyer looking for rental properties took interest in the house. The offer was modest but profitable enough for a return. I wanted to negotiate, push for more, but my gut told me to take it. I walked out of that deal with my first real profit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy my next property. And the next. Each deal got bigger. Each risk more calculated. I adapted. I learned how to read markets, anticipate trends, build connections. What started as a desperate gamble turned into a relentless pursuit. I flipped properties faster, turned failures into lessons, and refused to let setbacks slow me down. Contractors who once ignored me started taking me seriously. Banks that once hesitated to lend me money now returned my calls. I reinvested everything. No luxuries, no indulgences, just relentless forward momentum. I didn't crawl. I climbed. Years passed. My name became known in the real estate world. Not because of my family, but because of what I built from nothing. I didn't just invest in properties. I owned entire streets. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, high-end estates. I had done what my father swore I never could. I was a self-made woman. And then the news came. My parents' empire was crumbling. Their investments had turned against them. Their allies had abandoned them. Their wealth no longer untouchable. And the house that symbolized their power, the one I was cast out of, was now for sale. A slow smile formed as I read the listing. I had spent years working toward success. Now it was time for something else. Justice. The moment I saw the listing, I knew. The mansion that had once been my prison, the house where I had been disowned, was now up for sale. I stared at the screen, barely blinking. The grand estate, the symbol of my family's power and legacy, was no longer untouchable. The empire my father built had started to crack, and this was proof. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just another property. This was a message from the universe. I had a decision to make. I could ignore it. Walk away. Let someone else claim the remnants of their fall. Or I could own it. Own the house. Own the moment. Own the fact that I had risen from nothing while they had lost everything. The choice wasn't difficult. I made the call the next morning. Buying the mansion wasn't just about money, it was about strategy. I didn't walk in with my name on the offer. That would have been too obvious, too easy. Instead, I had one of my real estate firms make the bid, keeping my identity hidden behind layers of corporate paperwork. I didn't want them to see me coming. The bidding war was short. Their desperation was evident. What was once a property they would never have considered selling had become a burden they couldn't afford to keep. My offer, just slightly lower than market value, was accepted within days. And just like that, the house I had once been exiled from now belonged to me. The first time I walked through those doors as the owner, I expected to feel something overwhelming. Triumph, anger, closure. Instead, there was only quiet satisfaction. The grandeur remained. The marble floors, the towering ceilings, the expensive artwork. But it felt hollow now. As if the very soul of the place had left with my family's downfall. I took my time stepping through the halls, running my fingers over the smooth banisters, staring at the dining table where my father had once told me I would come crawling back. I could still hear his voice in my head. You think flipping houses is going to replace $1 billion empire? You have no idea what it means to fight for something. You'll never survive without us. I smirked, shaking my head. They had been wrong about everything. I kept the house untouched for weeks, letting it sit as I decided what to do with it. Sell it? No. Too impersonal. Too easy. Demolish it? Tempting but wasteful. No, there was something far more fitting. I would let them live in it. But not as owners. As tenants. The opportunity arrived faster than expected. A few months after purchasing the property, I received an unexpected call from a familiar number. Megan. I let the phone ring for a few seconds before answering. Megan, he said, his voice hesitant. I waited. Silence stretched between us. He knew. He had to know. Listen, he continued, clearing his throat. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, feigning disinterest. About what? More hesitation. Then finally the truth. The house, he admitted. Mom and Dad, they're struggling. They don't have a place to go. I let the words settle. Margaret and Gerald Holloway. My parents, who once held more wealth than they knew what to do with, were homeless. Nathan kept talking, but I barely listened. I was picturing them standing outside that grand mansion, the one they had ruled like a kingdom, now forced to ask for a place inside. The irony was poetic. And the decision was already made. All right, I said finally. I'll meet you there. The driveway felt different as I pulled in that evening. The last time I had stood here, I had been an outcast, walking away with nothing. Now I was the one holding the keys. Nathan was already outside when I arrived, shifting awkwardly on his feet. He looked different, less sure of himself, less smug, like a man who had finally seen how fragile his world really was. When he saw me step out of my car, he exhaled in relief. Megan, I appreciate this. Really. I know things weren't good between you and... The front door swung open before he could finish. My father stepped out first, his suit slightly wrinkled, his eyes sharper than I remembered. My mother followed, a forced calmness in her demeanor, but I saw the tension in the way she gripped her purse. They weren't just surprised to see me. They were dreading it. I took my time walking up the steps, letting the silence stretch. Finally, my father spoke. You own it. The words sounded unnatural coming from him, as if saying them out loud made them more real. I nodded. Yes. More silence. For the first time in my life, my father looked at me, not with authority, not with dominance, but with uncertainty. He was waiting for my verdict. I turned the keys in my hand, considering my next words carefully. You can stay, I said finally. But not as owners. As tenants. I didn't expect gratitude. And I didn't get it. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's lips parted as if she wanted to protest but didn't dare. Nathan, to his credit, didn't say anything at all. I'll send over the lease, I continued. You'll pay rent like everyone else in my properties. My father exhaled sharply. Megan, this isn't. I held up a hand, cutting him off. This is what it is. Take it or leave it. More silence. And then, the moment I had waited years for. Gerald Holloway nodded. He accepted. I had won. That night, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city, I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The years of struggle. The sacrifices. The nights spent wondering if I had made the right decision. I had fought, I had clawed my way up, and now I had done what they never thought possible. I hadn't just proven them wrong. I had rewritten the rules. And the best part? I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply made them face their own downfall. I smiled to myself as the lights of the city stretched before me. Tomorrow the lease agreement would be signed. And my parents, once the rulers of this house, would live in it under my terms. Not as kings, but as tenants. The moment my father nodded, accepting the reality that I now owned the house he once ruled, a strange silence settled over us. It wasn't a silence of peace. It was something heavier, charged with everything unsaid: resentment, regret, pride swallowed whole. Nathan looked between us as if expecting one of us to say something more, to bridge the chasm that had widened over the years. My mother, ever the image of cold restraint, kept her chin high, her expression unreadable. But I saw it. The flicker of disbelief. The unwilling acceptance. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a power struggle anymore. They had lost that right. I handed my father a neatly printed lease agreement, the kind I had given to hundreds of tenants before. But this one was different. This was personal. "You'll pay rent on the first of each month," I said, keeping my tone even. No special treatment. No exceptions. My father took the papers, his fingers gripping the edges just a little too tightly. He skimmed through the document, his jaw clenching at the standard clauses. Monthly rent, penalties for late payments, property maintenance responsibilities. My mother finally spoke. "Megan." I met her gaze, daring her to finish whatever plea she was about to make. He didn't. Instead, she exhaled softly, her pride forcing her to stay silent. They didn't have a choice. They signed. The moment the pen left the paper, it was done. I didn't linger. I turned, walking away without looking back, leaving them to sit with their loss in the house they no longer owned. That first month I waited. Not out of concern, not out of curiosity, but to see if they would break the terms of our agreement. Would they try to delay payment? Would they call, hoping for leniency? They didn't. On the first of the month, the rent was transferred on time without a single word. The money meant nothing to me. It was never about that. It was about principle. About proof that they now lived under my terms. I watched from a distance. My father, once a man who dictated boardrooms and commanded empires, now reduced to a businessman scrambling to stay afloat. My mother, once surrounded by luxury, now quietly adjusting to a life without staff at her beck and call. Nathan, no longer the heir to an untouchable empire, now learning what it meant to live without guaranteed privilege. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. The house itself changed under my ownership. I didn't renovate it immediately. That would have been too easy, too impersonal. Instead, I let time do its work. The once pristine gardens weren't tended with the same perfection they once were. The grandeur of the house faded into something less intimidating, less imposing. It was no longer a symbol of their power. It was just another rental property. And that was the most fitting fate of all. Months passed. The first time my father called me, I didn't answer. The second time, I let it ring a little longer before rejecting it. The third time I picked up. There was no hesitation in his voice, no struggle to mask his words with authority. He had let that go. "Megan," he said, and for the first time in years, there was something real in his tone. Not power. Not control. Just acknowledgement. I waited. I suppose I should say, "You proved me wrong." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting those words settle in the way he never would have imagined. Because they weren't an apology. But they were enough. I exhaled. Yeah. I did. There was no need for anything else. We both knew who had won. And this time there was no one left to deny it. Months passed. The lease agreement had been signed. Rent was paid on time. No missed payments, no late excuses. It was a business arrangement. Formal, unemotional, exactly the way I wanted it. And yet something shifted. It wasn't a sudden moment of clarity, no dramatic revelation. Just a gradual change, subtle and inevitable. For the first time I saw my father not as a giant but as a man. A man who had once stood at the top of the world and now lived within the boundaries I set for him. For the first time I saw my mother not as an untouchable figure but as a woman. A woman who once thrived in a life of luxury and now silently adjusted to something less. And for the first time I saw Nathan not as my rival but as someone caught between two worlds. He had lived as the golden child, but that gold had tarnished. Now he was just like the rest of us, trying to navigate the wreckage of what once was. They weren't invincible anymore. They were just people. I visited the house one afternoon not to inspect, not to collect rent, just to see. looked different now. Lived in but not the way it once had been. The air of superiority was gone. The manicured perfection, the pristine elegance. It had faded. I knocked. For a long moment there was no answer. Then the door opened. My mother stood there, caught between surprise and caution. She looked older, not from age but from the weight of everything they had lost. "Megan," she said, the name hesitant on her tongue as if she still wasn't sure where we stood. I met her gaze, seeing something I never thought I'd find in her eyes. Humility. "Can I come in?" I asked. She nodded, stepping aside. The house felt smaller now. Or maybe I had just outgrown it. My father sat in the living room, the same place he used to dictate our futures with a single sentence. Now he simply looked up, acknowledging me with a nod. I had expected resentment, defiance, maybe even bitterness. But what I saw was something else. Resignation. Understanding. Maybe even something close to respect. Nathan sat across from him, quiet, watchful. He didn't smirk this time. Didn't make a single sarcastic remark. I took a slow breath. I wanted to talk. My father set his glass down, folding his hands. "We're paying the rent. I assume this isn't about that." I ignored the sharpness in his tone, not because it hurt but because I knew it wasn't real. "I'm not here as your landlord," I said simply. Silence stretched between us. Then my mother sighed. "Then why are you here?" I hesitated. The answer had been clear before, but now, standing in front of them, I realized I wasn't sure. Maybe I had expected some grand moment. Maybe I thought there would be a final victory, a closing scene where I stood above them, triumphant. But there was no victory here. No clear ending. Just reality. I leaned back against the armrest, crossing my arms. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." My father scoffed, but it wasn't cruel. "Just tired. You want the truth, or the version that makes this easier?" I raised an eyebrow. "The truth." He nodded once as if he respected the answer. "We're adjusting," he admitted. "The money's not the same. The lifestyle's not the same. But we're still standing." For a moment I saw a glimpse of the man he used to be. Not the cold businessman, not the untouchable figure of my childhood, but someone who had built something from nothing. Just like I had. "Good," I said simply. Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. "This is weird." I chuckled. "Yeah, it is." For the first time in years we weren't speaking as enemies. Just as people who had been through hell and were still finding their way back. That night I stood outside the house for a long time, staring at the windows that once felt like walls around me. I had spent so long chasing success, proving them wrong, making sure I never had to crawl back. And I hadn't. But standing there I realized something. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I had built something, not just wealth, not just power, but a life. A future. One that had nothing to do with them. I smiled to myself, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. I had won. Not because I had taken their house. Not because they were now tenants under my terms. But because for the first time in my life, I didn't need them anymore. I turned, walking away. This time I wasn't leaving in exile. I was leaving on my own terms.